Welcome to the Retire Right podcast with Larry Heller. You deserve complete financial advice. There's no acceptable alternative if you want a plan to live well and on your terms. Complete financial advice equals complete peace of mind. Now, let's get into this week's podcast episode.
Hello and welcome to Retire Right with Larry Heller from Heller Wealth Management. Today, Larry has brought in another special guest, and that is Susan Williams. Susan Williams is the founder of Booming Encore, a digital media hub dedicated to providing information and inspiration to help baby boomers create and live their very best encore. Prior to launching Booming Encore, Susan spent 28 years in senior leadership positions within a number of different corporations. Susan launched Booming Encore 6 years ago, and today Booming Encore is ranked as being one of the top global social media influencers for baby boomers, aging and retirement, as well as a top blog for baby boomers. Being a boomer herself, Susan loves to discover ways to live life to the fullest. She shares her experiences, observations, and opinions on living life after 50, and personally tries to embrace Booming Encore's philosophy of making sure every day matters, which is a fantastic philosophy, right, Larry?
Absolutely, and thanks for the introduction, Eric.
Yeah.
As you're aware, and our listeners are aware, Retire Right, and what we do here is retirement planning. Although we do talk about some non-financial aspects, most of it is geared around the retirement side. So many people are well aware of the need for a financial retirement plan, but there is another aspect that's very important and is mostly overlooked, and that's the non-financial aspects of retirement. So that's why I've asked Susan Williams of Booming Encore to discuss this side of retirement planning and why people should really take some time to focus on this when preparing for retirement. So thank you for joining us, Susan. Can you tell us a little bit more about Booming Encore and what it actually is?
Certainly. Thanks so much, Larry and Eric. It's a pleasure to be here. Booming Encore is actually, as Eric mentioned, a digital media hub specifically designed for baby boomers, which is really basically anyone over the age of 50. We focus and share information and resources specifically targeted for this audience. We cover everything from retirement to caregiving, travel to healthy aging, basically anything that baby boomers are interested in. We also have an amazing network of subject matter experts who share their knowledge and expertise with us, and we also curate content right across the globe on the internet. And we share all this information through our extensive social media channels, such as Twitter and Facebook, and also through our website, as well as publishing a monthly newsletter.
And why did you create Booming Encore?
Well, Larry, about 6 years ago, I left corporate life, and I started my own career transition into doing some consulting work. And as I was actually doing this transition, I was out actively looking for what I would say quality resources for baby boomers, which I am myself, and this whole sort of life transition. And as I was doing this, I really didn't find anything that I really related to me. So, being an entrepreneur sort of, I thought, why not go and create it? And so I initially launched the Booming Encore 6 years ago, initially as a hobby. One, because I wanted to, learn also about social media. At that time, I knew nothing about it. And two, I wanted to, share information and resources that I thought other people might actually like. And so fast forward 6 years and here we are today.
Oh, interesting. And so tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, and I spent 28 years in the corporate world in a number of senior leadership and executive positions. Pretty much everything from sales and operations, HR technology. I had quite a broad variety of experiences, but this is completely and totally a different switch for me. So I guess it's in some ways my own personal encore career, if you want to call it that. But I'm absolutely loving it. I'm learning something every day. I'm meeting really interesting people. And as a result, it's actually turned into also a bit of a passion.
Yeah, that's great. When prospective clients come in to meet with us, one of the first things that I ask them is to paint me a picture of your life 5 years or 10 years down the road. They come in with all these numbers, and before we even get that far, we start talking about visualizing their lifestyle there. So it's interesting when I came across your website to see some of these other areas that people need to really focus in on. So what specific areas does Booming Encore focus on?
Well, we primarily focus on the non-financial aspects of retirement, like you mentioned. We really do a deep dive into helping people plan for their retirement beyond the money. For example, we share articles and posts on healthy ways to age, encore careers, travel, caregiving, technology, and many other topics. We also tackle some of the challenges of aging, such as ageism. How are people going to actually age in place? We all know everybody wants to, but how do we actually do that? Finding work over 50 and some of the challenges associated with that. And also the very serious conversation around loneliness and isolation that can affect people as they age. So basically all of these topics and everything else that might interest somebody, who's over 50.
We didn't mention up top. So if anybody's listening, now wants to go to the website, it's boomingencore.com. We'll say it again at the end of the podcast. So you can go right onto the website and kind of look at this while we're talking about this. So I am actually looking at the website, and it is really interesting to see the different areas. I happen to be on the Boomer Life subtopic. Can you go through some of these subtopics there? It's very interesting how you came up with these and what they do.
Yeah, basically, Booming Encore and specifically the Booming Life, it's all around anything, for instance, we talk about technology. There's a lot of information being shared around technology and how it's going to help people age. So we actually do a bit of a deep dive into, what are some of these technologies? We often add a commentary on whether we think they're, going to be actually successful or not, or is it a bit of a pipe dream? We also talk about caregiving and the fact that not only is this generation often caregiving for their parents, but our children are also going to potentially be caregivers. We talk about, housing and the things that are associated with how people are actually going to live. You probably are aware that 96% of people plan on aging in place, as they call it, or staying in their own homes to age. And so how are we actually going to do this? There's also the whole topic of relationships. Believe it or not, that the divorce rate of people over the age of 50 is climbing at a staggering rate in comparison to other demographics. And a lot of it is because, as the children empty out, the relationship is left, and people are having to look at each other and say, oh, wow, okay, I've got, potentially another 20 or 30 years with this person. Is this what I really want to do? So these are sort of all the topics that we try to get into. Is there anything else, Larry, you want me to comment on that?
Well, no, just interesting you talk about the Great Divorce. We did a podcast on that with a matrimonial attorney, and I think it's our most popular podcast that we've had to date. So I can definitely see that. So who are writing some of these articles on Boomer Life? Where do you get the content? I guess this is all for educational purposes. If somebody wants to learn more about this.
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways. One, I'm really blessed to actually have some very strong contributors, and a lot of them are either professionals within the field, specifically around retirement or aging, or I also have a number of different authors who have authored books. So they actually share their experience and expertise. And as well, within our team, we do a lot of writing as well, which is often based off of what I would call credible, reputable resources. So we'll often take an article and actually expand it out further and what it actually means to our audience. So we also have a number of, I've had a number of university professors, for instance, in the area of gerontology, who come on to speak to us and share what their research is. And then we try and help translate that to mean, well, what does that research actually mean for somebody who's actually living the lifestyle that we're talking about right now?
Yeah, and why do you think it's important for people to focus on these non-financial aspects of retirement?
Well, I think it's so important, Larry, because retirement is going to be so much different now than it has been for generations before. For example, the average person is now looking at potentially 20 to 30 years in retirement, and that's almost as long as a career in itself. And there's so much research that's showing that people really need to stay engaged and active in these years in order to maintain both their physical and mental health. So the days of, sitting in a rocking chair for 20 or 30 years on the front porch, I mean, that's just really not reasonable, and it's really not healthy. But the really sad part is that there's so many people who are not really preparing for this time of their life. They're focused on getting to the retirement, finish line. But once they get past that finish line, they really have no idea what they plan on doing. And so we're strongly advocating and supporting the idea of start thinking about this sooner rather than later. Because once they cross that finish line and they don't really have any sort of purpose or reason to get up in the morning, you can easily slip into isolation, experience some health problems and even depression. For instance, there was one study conducted by Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center, that found that people who had a greater sense of purpose in life had substantially reduced the risk of Alzheimer's disease, as well as reduced risk of precursor to Alzheimer's and mild cognitive impairment. So, I mean, the research is starting to show you really need to have something that keeps you engaged, keeps you socially networked, and keeps you, like as I said, having a reason to get up in the morning. And the sooner you actually start working on this, the better, before you actually find yourself in the situation.
No, that's great advice. I mean, I kind of call it the second act in life. It's no longer your grandparents are in retirement. And you mentioned working, and there's a section on here called Encore, careers. I had a guest on a business broker on there, and he said that surprisingly, over 50 individuals buying franchises is the biggest growth area that he's having. So people are getting older and they're looking to change career. So I want to explain a little bit more about the Encore career section you have on here?
Certainly. So, I mean, basically, baby boomers are one of the top demographics that are successful entrepreneurs. So, I mean, often when people think of, an entrepreneur, they often think somebody young. Well, in actual fact, these successful entrepreneurs are actually older. And so a lot of them are actually going into this, recognizing that, their career, it does not necessarily end at that 65 or 55 or whatever year they actually formally possibly exit, a traditional career. And they're starting up businesses. Often it could be a hobby. There's a small business right up to, as you mentioned, buying a franchise. And in actual fact, there's a lot of people over 50 who are starting like amazing, businesses. And so actually on our website, we profile a number of these people who just to kind of show what people are actually doing out there. And that, just because you exit one workforce doesn't necessarily mean you stop working. You may actually find yourself working in some other way, even part-time or volunteer work is considered work to a certain degree as well. So there's lots of different things that, people actually are able to do. And I think it's just opening up your mind to these opportunities.
So you actually have real life situations that you have on the website?
Yes. For instance, if you go into, I believe, starting a business, I'm sorry, I don't have the website in front of me myself.
I have it in front of me. So if you go into starting a business, oh yeah, I see here you have different individuals, celebrating older entrepreneurs, reinventing, your career. So you do have, I guess some real life stories here.
Absolutely. Yes.
And one of the other areas that I found interesting on the website is this section on inspiration. Do you have any stories on the inspiration you can share with us?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great site, great part of the site. And the reason why I love it so much is that it just, again, demonstrates just what's possible. For instance, like there's one story of Ernestine Shepherd. Now, Ernestine Shepherd was actually named the oldest female competitive bodybuilder by Guinness Book of World Records. But what makes her story so unique is that she didn't even get started bodybuilding until she was 56. And if you actually see, it's very impressive. So it just really resonates that, some of these things you don't have to have started at a young age. You can start now if it's really an interest. I mean, I often say if you're going to do anything, majorly physical, be sure to talk to your doctor first. Make sure that you're actually able to. But I mean, there's so many stories of people doing these things that you wouldn't necessarily have thought possible. And it's really challenging, our frame of mind and our view and perspectives of aging. Another great story is about Tetsuo Horiuchi. Now, this Japanese gentleman, when he retired, he really wanted to paint, but he couldn't actually afford the traditional art supplies of paints or pastels. So he did something really ingenious. He actually started using Excel. And who would ever have thought Excel for, painting? But the works of art this gentleman is now creating is just throwing the whole art world on its head. So he's truly like an innovator in art. And he only started after he retired. He never actually had painted before. And then there's one other story which I love to share. And this one, I personally met Melissa Davey through Twitter of all places. She was actually starting to share her story of her career transition. And through strictly a chance encounter, she took on the passion of actually producing and directing a film, which was completely different than anything she's done before. And right now, she's actually touring the country screening her film, the Beyond 60 Project, which profiles a number of different women doing impressive things over the age of 60. And so we actually profile her on our website too. So these are just some examples of what some people are doing and just showing that anything is possible. Everybody just needs to really find out what interests them and then just go for it. If you're interested in reading more about these people, as I mentioned, and their stories, you can find more of that on our website, as you mentioned, under the inspirational stories and videos.
So one kind of underlying theme that comes across when we talk about people of Second Life is they want to travel. They want to travel more. Mm-hmm. And I see you have a travel section on the website. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Certainly. What we're also discovering is that as much as people want to travel, they're also looking for life experiences. And so they're wanting to kind of shake things up. Not to say that the traditional travel is not of interest, but we're actually starting to see, a lot more people interested in intergenerational travel. So family sort of situations where different generations are going away together to share, life experiences. We've even got one story of a woman who is actually retiring on a cruise ship. Like, who would have ever thought that many years ago? And so we share that story.
So she actually retired permanently on a cruise ship?
On a cruise ship. Yeah. I can't remember how old she is. I think she's in her 90s now. But I mean, and there's some reasons why she did it. And so we kind of explain, why she's actually doing that and whether it may be something somebody's interested in. There's another couple who's actually roaming the globe, staying at Airbnbs and living their retirement that way. And so they shared some, suggestions on how to actually do that. So this is sort of the things that we're starting to discover. It's not the traditional, what I would say, all-inclusive, let's sit on a beach. And again, I'm not saying that isn't happening, but just the desire to actually go off the beaten path or do something slightly different or share experiences with their families are things that we're starting to see emerge.
Because that's one of the things I guess trying to find the best opportunities or just other ideas when you have some more time could be helpful to read other people's real life stories. So if you were going to give someone, advice on preparing for retirement, what would that be, Susan?
Well, the first thing I would say is focus on your health. Your health is one of these things that you don't really miss until you don't have it. And your health is what's going to allow you to be able to do all the things that you really want to. So, make sure you're exercising. There's so much research now on the benefits of exercising, both for your physical and mental health, and also especially as you age. Make sure that you're getting in strength training, and sarcopenia is really something that we all need to be aware of. That's basically muscle loss as you age. And so, resistance training, weight training, those sort of things, eating well, is another important aspect. So all of those things, along with, making sure that you do your regular checkups and follow the advice of your physicians is so critical, because that really is the starting ground for whatever you may want to do further on. Secondly, I would suggest start building your social networks before you retire. So many people have got like a very strong network at work, but once that's gone, then what? For instance, we ran one article, and I thought this was great. It was an initiative that was being done out of actually North Bay, Ontario. And the initiative was, who's on your list of 8 was the question. So I often ask people, if you had to actually say, who are you actually socially involved and engaged with, could you name 8 people? And that's critical, because you're going to need that network. You can't retire into isolation. It's just not healthy, and it probably will not make you happy. So start building those social networks now. Thirdly, again, we've talked about this very much throughout this session, Larry. It's like, how are you going to fill your days? Once you get past that initial honeymoon stage of retiring and that freedom quote from work, as you might see it, you really need to have something worthwhile. So study after study is finding that, having a lack of purpose in your life can be quite detrimental to your overall health and well-being. And so the more that you've actually got a constructed plan, or at least some idea of what direction you're going in, the easier your transition will be. And finally, but probably also one of the most important ones, is be sure to talk to your significant other and make sure you're aligned on what your plans for retirement are. Sadly, so many people assume that somebody else has got the same view of what they want in retirement. And I think this may also be contributing to possibly, some of the higher levels of divorce rate, where you're going to live. What are you going to do? What's the expectations? Are you expecting to spend all your time together? If so, the other party may not necessarily want that. These are all critical conversations that really should be had sooner rather than later, as I often say. So those are sort of my top 4 that I would say are some ways to really get started.
Yeah, those are kind of interesting. Coming to some of the thoughts across my head is that, do I have 8? I got to think about that now. But it's also very, very true. We actually had a couple come in and we started talking about painting their picture in retirement. And halfway through, they were actually arguing with each other. So it wasn't they were basically, closing on retirement, had all the financials numbers, but one was planning on babysitting the grandchildren, and the other one had no interest in doing that and wanted to go and live in another country for a few months. And I'm like, this is going to be interesting to see how this gets resolved. The good thing is, they did kind of compromise and figure it out, but it got pretty heated for a little bit.
Wow. Exactly. And when you're thinking about the amount of time you're going to potentially have, this is a critical change in life. And, as a result, whenever there's something this drastic, you need to make sure whoever you're with is on side, or at least you have those conversations because, as you mentioned, it can get quite heated very fast.
So there's a lot of information on the website here in the different areas. Is there any one area that's kind of your favorite? I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here.
Well, I think my favorite actually is sort of the inspirational aspects, just simply because it's a great platform to jump from to say what's possible. And I think that's sort of the message that we're just trying to say is anything's possible if it's something that you really want to do and it's something that, you financially can afford. I often use these caveats: financially can afford and physically are able. But I mean, beyond that, it's anything's possible. And that's what these people are actually showing us is that, this is a great time of life. It's an opportunity. And if you don't actually take it now, the question often is then when? And so if you've got those dreams that you've had dormant and you want to bring them out, or, relationships that maybe you've not necessarily nurtured as well as you would like to, now's the time to do it. So these are all the opportunities. And that's, I think, the piece that I often like the most out of all of this is just such a great opportunity of life. And to be able to have this opportunity and to use it I can't see any better way to spend your time.
Yeah, great. So how can people connect with Booming Encore? And I guess I gave the website before, boomingencore.com.
Yeah, boomingencore.com is where we sort of launch from. And we'll also send out monthly newsletters, which sort of kind of wrap up sort of what's been trending over the past month. So be sure to sign up for the newsletters there. As well, we're very, very active on social media, specifically Twitter, so at Booming Encore, and Facebook. Where we send out daily updates there, and we just actually launched into Instagram, so we're just kind of going there, and we also have a number of different videos on our YouTube channel. So if you just look up Booming Encore on YouTube or Booming Encore on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, you're going to find us.
Well, that's great. I see on the website on the right hand side how you can sign up for the newsletter. That's terrific. So thank you, Susan, for being a guest on the podcast. This has been very insightful. And for everyone listening out there, there's a chock full of information and real life stories and things you'd want to learn more about by going to the website at boomingencore.com. So thank you again, Susan. I appreciate all the time.
Larry, it's been an absolute delight. Thank you so much for having me. And I really appreciate it. To everybody out there, I wish everyone their best Booming Encore.
Absolutely. Susan, thank you so much for your time today. Larry, thank you for bringing her in. Susan, I got to admit, I was browsing your website and there was a blog on there that I just think is fantastic. The title of it is, Who Do You Want to Be? And I think that is a fantastic question because I always said this when I was younger. Who do I want to be when I grow up? Who do I want to be when I grow up? And I said that through my 30s and into my 40s. But at the same time, right, when you get to retirement, who do you want to be?
Exactly.
And I think that's a fantastic question. And this story is actually about George Coronis, if I'm saying that last name correctly. And I love in the article, it says he started doing something, it was actually swimming, after retiring at the age of 80. So I think, man, I mean, that is hugely inspirational. That is great. So I'm definitely going to be getting into these inspirational stories. And then you hit home with me when you and Larry were talking about the grandkids and things. And Larry and I have talked about this before. I think that's what Larry does really, really well with his clients. And I don't know how much you've had a chance to work with him, Susan, but he asks those questions. He talks to his clients on a continual basis. Larry, I know you know how important that is because you can have a plan, until all of a sudden you find out you're going to be a grandparent. And then those plans can definitely change because somebody wants to babysit them all the time and have them over to the house and won't let you move out of Nebraska, Larry. That's kind of how it works for me now. I'd love to be at the beach, but there is no beach near Nebraska. And unless I can take the grandkids with me, it's not going to happen. So plans change. Always check with your advisor and work with somebody professional on those ongoing plans and be inspired. This website is fantastic. Thanks again, Susan.
Thanks so much, Eric. Really appreciate it.
All right, Larry, thank you for your time today as well. Great guest.
Thanks, Eric. This was great.
All right. And thank you all for listening to the Retire Right podcast with Larry Heller. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Larry comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. That circle of 8 that we were talking about, share this podcast with them. Grow that network stronger. Again, thanks for listening today. For everyone at Heller Wealth Management, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.